Time for hot topics, guys.
Truth, lies, shenanigans.
All right. Let me tell you what hot topics is. One of our hosts will start us out and they'll tell us what their topic is, if it's a truth, lie, or shenanigans, and we'll talk about it. And then once time is up, you'll see our friend Genji. Then we'll stop and go to our live audience questions and comments online and talk about it for a little bit more. So make sure you're talking with us online like you have been all night. Once we're done, we'll go on to the next host and their topic. And tonight, let's start off with Rob B. Rob B. What are we talking about?
Sweet. Well, this is an interesting story that Neo put on my map. It's the story of a transgender man in Wales, in the UK, who does not want to be recorded as the mother on their child's birth certificate. So Freddie McConnell, that's in the image over here, is a journalist in his 30s who was born a woman and wants to be registered as the father or parent on the birth certificate. Now, he's hit this claim to the High Court last year and then later to the Court of Appeals, but both of his claims were dismissed at the hearings. The judges at both rulings said that the name mother needs to appear on the certificate. So, unfortunately, this Monday, the legal challenge suffered another defeat because he was denied permission to mount an appeal to the Supreme Court on the grounds that there was nothing arguable as a point of law. So this means that he can't take it any further in the UK courts. It's a landmark case because after Mr. McConnell became pregnant several weeks after legally transitioning to become a man, and he was informed by the General Register Office in the UK that by law they needed to register him as the baby's mother. So when legal proceedings really began in 2019, Mr. McConnell was initially subject to an anonymity order, but it was lifted because it had emerged that he had actually filmed a documentary called Seahorse about his attempts to get pregnant. So my question is, in your opinion, should Freddie McConnell's request to appear as father or parent on the birth certificate, should it have been granted by the UK courts?
Should it have been granted? What do you think, Lizzie?
Should it have been granted? Lizzie?
What's it to the UK courts? Why do they care? Why is this so important to them? Of course it should have been granted, at least in my opinion. Of course it should have been granted. They're not the ones who are raising this child. They are not the ones who are part of this child's family, or part of this man's family. So I think that there should be some exceptions to how people, especially in 2020, things have changed. We no longer, or we're moving away from a lot of these antiquated beliefs, antiquated rules, antiquated laws. And I think we have to start to update to keep up with the times. I think I sent you guys an article earlier this week about Illinois. The state of Illinois here in the United States, not in the UK, but they have been, adjusting their laws as it relates to birth certificates and transgender people, and allowing them to decide how they want to classify themselves on the birth certificate. So again, my response is like, what is it to the court? Why is this so offensive to the court when they have no say so? They're not going to be active or involved in this child's life, in this family's life at all. Nia?
So, this is one of those dicey conversations to have. But my thoughts are, I get it. Everyone should be allowed to define themselves for themselves, as I've been telling Lizzie over and over again.
You are not white, Nia. You're not white.
But maybe a society, but with a society like ours that's moving towards acceptance of gender choices and changes, we should also move to more gender neutral terms and pronouns in general, right? Because their language, like Chinese or Finnish, your favorite, right? That that doesn't have, that has gender neutral terms for people, right? But with that being said, um, outside of gender, there needs to be a way still to delineate on a birth certificate the actual person that birthed the child. I think this is where we're talking about semantics and language, right? So, we refer to the mother as two different things. One, a mother is a female person that birthed a child, right? Or, but a mother is also defined as the one that birthed the child versus the father who typically doesn't is not able to birth a child. So I'm just saying, I can see where a court could, say, hey, you're not a mother, or they're defining mother and father as who actually gave birth, because you're talking lineage, you're talking about um, keeping track of you know who is what, tax purposes, etc., legal documents. You want to know who actually gave birth to the child, and that's maybe this. We just need to look for a different term for it. Is what I'm suggesting. I'm not saying we can define ourselves as whatever, but maybe there just needs to be a different terminology for the person that actually gave birth to a child.
Well, maybe people need to not be so lazy. Like, if you need to know that information, do a little research. But also, he offered not mother, he offered not to just remove mother, he offered to use the word parent,
Right.
which is
But
important.
that but the
So,
parent the word parent doesn't define the actual person that gave birth to the child.
but
So,
what
a
is,
question to you, Neo. Because a child receives their genetic makeup from both parents. So, why does the
But
birth
they don't
canal
receive the
have?
same genetic makeup equally. So I mean, and when we're talking lineage, because there's an X and a Y chromosome, so there you don't receive the same genetic. I mean, we're not. It's not apples and
but,
apples.
but what, I mean, and you probably will educate me on this, but what is the need exactly? If looking at, when you're
Well, then we
looking at
don't. What is the need for a birth certificate in general?
what,
Right.
to know who
The
the
birth. I mean, a
to
birth
know who the
certificate
parents
is.
are, but why does it need to be specific? You know who the parents are. Why do you need to be specific in knowing which one of these people birthed this child?
I mean, because we're talking. I mean, look, I think I think it has been defined over the years. I don't. I may not be able to answer that question. And maybe I need to do a little more research to be able to answer that question. But
I
my
really like that,
perspective is
Les.
that birth certificates are intended to define.
Ooh, good question from Jeanette Brown. What happens in instances of surrogacy on a birth certificate?
I
That's a
think that's,
really solid.
but I think that's a
Yeah.
genetic thing. That even gets deeper, right?
Mhm.
You know, that's a
I
great
was
question.
I'm really
I
glad
think
that you brought up the Illinois family earlier, Liz, because that's Miles Brady Davis. I did a little bit of research into it. So in Chicago, Precious and Miles Brady Davis are the couple that fought for the same thing. So they're in a situation where they're both trans. So the
hmm.
trans man gave birth to the child, and the trans woman provided the genetic material to produce said child. But now they won their appeal, or they won their, yeah, there was an appeal that they made to the courts to appear as the other on the birth certificate, and that was awarded to them. And they had a lot of legal representation. LGBT associations were very supportive of them, and because by misgendering them on a legal document, you're denying their humanity. And so I think that Chicago got it right. The good state of Illinois got it right. And I think it's going to be more challenges. And as the dialogue is changing, because this is still a new dialogue, if you will, in our society. And these are antiquated ideas that need to be challenged before they're changed, before they're overruled. And I think
Definitely to
that
be
Freddie
challenged.
McConnell, exactly. So after there will be more challenges like Freddie's in the UK court system, and when these people eventually win their appeals to the court, Freddie will be able to revisit it, and that'll be a big day for him.
Also, keep in mind that in some states, you do not have to put your child's father's name on the birth certificate.
Mm.
So,
But
I mean,
but you do have to put the mother's name, which again,
but you don't have to
you're.
put the father's name.
But
You
what's the
don't have to
purpose
put
of the birth certificate in the first place? Then, see, that's what it
I
comes
didn't.
down to: the purpose of the
I
birth
didn't
certificate,
invent
because you're
it. I didn't
tracking,
invent
Sure.
it.
you're
I'm just
tracking and
giving you.
tracing nationality among other things. I mean, you know, like where was the child born? Where who, you know, maybe we get rid of birth certificates if that's the case. But it's the
I
purpose.
mean,
What is the purpose of birth certificate?
I do think you need some documentation of when and where a child was born.
Okay,
However, I don't think it needs to be as specific
so we don't need to
as to
define who the parents
no,
were.
Yeah.
not if you can have a birth certificate where the father's name doesn't have to be there.
It's essentially the registration of a live birth, and that's something that needs to be recorded by your governments. Otherwise, you have no idea what's happening with your population. So I understand why, but I I agree with Liz. It doesn't need to be quite as specific as it is as far as just the identifiers. Just as the language and our just as everything is evolving as far as this
Yeah,
situation
and I
is
think the
concerned.
language in general needs to evolve. That really was my main point. Is that I think we need to our language has to evolve to become more gender neutral in general.
Also, one more thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, either someone on the panel or out in our viewing audience, for kids that are adopted, if you are a parent who gave your child up for adoption, you have the right to have your identity sealed. And so
In many cases,
there
yeah,
are in many cases, so that's another situation where no one, at least
you don't
for
need to know.
the
Mhm.
child doesn't know.
I love Kevin Thaxton. So you just call him thing one and thing two. I want to point out some comments online. So we got Lola J. Should birth certificates have classifications through however many years, and then the individual state chooses the sex or gender? She also said this is fascinating. Some have argued that marriage certificates should be time limited, like driving certificates.
That's for you two. Yeah, that's for you gents. I'm not married.
Jose
No.
says birthing parent right there, done. Just call it birthing parent.
There you
Uh,
go. Good idea, Jose. Little too animated
is
up
he?
in the new
Oh,
household.
good.
Everything. Is he's having earthquakes over there? Mike Winter. Intersex children are assigned a gender. Gender identity is not about semantics and language. Great comments. Great comments online. All right, let's jump to our next hot topic.
Shenanigans, truth, lies, shenanigans.